And yet, late in the journey of my life, finding myself in this sombre, melancholy, pitch-black forest, the one in which I had wandered countless times before, I came to realize that there had only ever been this forest, with its gnarled roots, and choked with all these weeds, thistles, brambles, and menacing branches. Only they, and I, and no others. Here it was, I came into the world, and here it would be that I would finally, if nature possesses an iota of kindness, escape it. Bramble-born, thorn-crowned, famished, lost, and alone, always alone, and never more alone than when in the presence of these so-called others, who, in youth, were objects of mystery, terror, and fascination, but who were now never anything more than annoyances, inert things upon which I occasionally stumble or upon which I stub my toe, that is to say, nothing. In days past, I'd stepped frequently outside this dark grove to encounter these nothings, who spoke endlessly, without ever uttering a word to which it was worth attending. We'd part, chance on one another again, reenact the same farce, each of us leaving determined to convince ourselves that we'd received some sort of nourishment, when in fact we'd each parted stupefied, famished, and aghast. And then we'd meet again as wretched old men, with less to say than ever, seeing only despair and disappointment in the countenance of the other, and yet, again, we would attempt to convince ourselves of the same lie, knowing full well it was a lie, and that our attempts could only be sluggish, pathetic, and laughably absurd. Bad puns told on an escalator, busy ferrying us both to the gallows. Travesties, sham burlesques of grizzled old men, looking on helplessly, each at the other, for some sign of life, some shred of kindling in the other's bearing, incarcerated as we both were in the morgue's freezer, banging at its walls, screaming for signs of life to appear, to open the goddamn door and release us, for we could not possibly be these wasted, foul, musty creatures. No, no, this was a nightmare. Surely, I would think to myself, I shall wake momentarily to find myself in some sort of tolerable body, with pleasant, motivating thoughts, wishes, and desires. It cannot end this way, to which the forest would predictably respond with its deafening silence. With every quarter hour, the croaking of a raven, or the howls of a distant wolf pack, the hum of crickets, the beating of my heart in my chest and ears, the sounds of my insipid breathing, my vile, rotting, lizard body breathing, declaring, life must go on, life must be lived, at any cost, in any condition, no matter how bitter. In the moonlight now, I see what is it? A tiny chipmunk, perhaps? Standing, like an effigy, on the forest floor. I approach. He does not move. I am upon him. Nothing. It is too dark to make out his expression, though I am inches from his little face. He is dead, and yet, somehow, remains standing. What does this mean? What can this possibly mean? I've never seen anything so unspeakably awful, so terrible. I must bury him, but I cannot bear the sight of him. I am shaking. I am sobbing. Here, before me, stands every loss, every anguish that this ill-conceived universe has borne in its belly. Since its inception, it's all right here, in this little, fuzzy Christ figure, whom I cannot touch, to whom I cannot offer a proper burial, and by whom I am destroyed. He is me. He is all of us. But since I don't give a fig for all of us, it matters only that he is me. I can neither touch myself nor give myself a proper burial. Can the poor thing not decompose this very night? Be borne away by the evening breeze? Why this body, this tawdry melodrama? Could it be any more obvious that every atom within him and within us yearns only to be freed of this shabby cage in which it finds itself, to sputter out into the deepest recesses of the idiot universe, to, at last, be free, free of being this downy little Jesus, of being me. And suddenly there is a shooting star diving into the abyss and disintegrating completely. Fleeing from what? Its wife, surely. Its friends, arriving for a dinner party, to gossip, to perhaps watch a sports event, to, at least, to have it on in the background while busy gossiping. It is suiciding, of course, this shooting star. It's the only sane course, its only alternative when it honestly considers its neighbours, family, and ancestors, with all their endless, moronic babbling, histrionics, and dancing about, their endless, pointless revolutions around one another, their being born and dying. With comets, it is precisely the same. The agony, the wish to escape, perhaps the solar system around the corner, is somewhat less soul-crushing than this one. But it is never to be. It can never be. There is to be only pointless wandering, mindless sputtering, asinine trudging, ever onwards through endless, black, pulverizing space, friendless and forlorn, all the while seeking and hoping for our doom, which would be no doom at all, which would be in fact release from the endless, moronic running about, this imbecilic doing, this perpetual idiot doing, with its unceasing, hypocritical protestations and assertions of necessity, of virtue, and of the need to march onwards from one foolish project to another, in order to keep the noise and hum in one's ears sufficiently loud to drown out the voice within which is screaming, "Enough! This is lunacy! Lay down your arms!" The wish to eat, to fuck, to sleep, to shit, the wild lashes of an insane, blood-crazed, sadistic charioteer, whipping the horses, one of which is you, your very self. The bag of meat in which you've been encased and cursed to slog through your days, whipping you to ribbons, to a bloody pulp, on the way to the foot of a Nero who will have you flayed alive, stuffed with mountains of wax, to which will be fastened countless wicks, hoisted on poles, and set aflame above him, as he strums the cithara and sings one of his latest poems, all the while casting a caustic eye over the crowd in search of bodies with which he might later entertain himself. Underneath his purple robes there is nothing but the hairy rodent which hides underneath everyone else's garments. Why does the forest suddenly hiss, snarl? Why is there only menace? Why is there now blood dripping from the naked moon, half hidden behind that gnarled and grimacing oak tree? Am I now to stand as still, erect, and frozen as my little friend, until I am quite as dead, as rigid as he? Is that it? Is that what's wanted? By the night sky? By me? This is exhausting. I am nodding off. Am I dreaming? Am I alive? And what is that gurgling sound? Clearly this is all being offered me at this particular moment, in order that I might uncover some piece of myself of which I am presently unaware. Whether some former self knew it, some paper doll on a chain, who I had once been, although I rings more than a bit odd in this context, or whether I had simply never before encountered this piece of myself because it had been squirreled away in the recesses of some catacomb deep within my bowels, it hardly mattered. This current or former version of myself had a message for me, and I needed only to scratch away a few fragments of bark, clouds, skin, viscera, and hair in order to uncover it. Was it staring me straight in the face? Was the gaze of the dead chipmunk perhaps fixed upon it? I looked in that direction with great intensity, The darkness was of sufficient blackness to allow me to see all manner of visages, bodies, demons, angels, omens, past loves, and ancient abuses in the barks of trees, in hedges, in the dirt and moss of the forest floor. There they were, one morphing into another with the rightness one encounters in dreams, which is, as a rule, so vehemently rejected upon awakening. And yet I could not shake it. I was indeed surrounded by a host of beings, a nation of phantoms, all proposing to either silently enlighten me, or to, I wasn't sure, perhaps subject me to unimaginable torments, maybe even murder me. I recalled how, long ago, when on the precipice of the insensibility towards which a particular anesthesia for some forgotten procedure was driving me, I entered into the strangest conversation with myself, in which the terrors of death, my imminent death, were bandied about, debated, and, finally, dismissed with what, not much more than a scoff. This was precisely what I now felt. When I was finally able to bore down sufficiently deeply within myself, it became clear. I no longer feared death, perhaps I never had. He was now a friend, the best of friends. And yet I was equally happy with the scenario in which all would be momentarily revealed to me by one of these beings, what in fact was going on, who I am, and was, perhaps, for all I knew, the mystery of the world's knot. What happened was none of these things, overcome by a lethargy and fatigue so profound that I sank to my knees. I awoke, many hours later, a few inches from where my little friend had stood, as if he had been cast in marble for all eternity. But he was nowhere to be seen, nor were all those peering eyes and curious faces which had surrounded me the night before. There was to be no message, and, at least for now, no death, only profound enervation. The seemingly bottomless, utterly familiar disappointment of my life, my imbecilic existence, of which neither pint-sized Jesus nor monumental God would ever take note, much less care to explain or attempt to diminish. Nothing. Thrown back upon myself, I wept like a baby for what seemed like hours. I begged this God to let me die, or to at least supply me with the means and courage to do it myself. Silence. And then, several minutes later, the listless and vaguely contemptuous caw of a crow, who apparently could not have found me more mediocre, and for whom it seemed quite the effort to cough up even that small, dismissive insult. Ah, well, I did not, upon reflection, disagree with his assessment. But there is always the hope that I might grab this wretchedness by the throat and force it to obey my intellect, that dead thing which snuffs out the passions, along with all else that is vital in experience, that which so eagerly snuffs out the life of every butterfly it meets, to then pin it to the wall. To use it to turn this hellscape into a sort of idea upon which I might then muse, about which I might perhaps write a villanelle, or with which I might amuse my friends with bits of clever, morbid chatter, in reaction to which they will, perhaps, be amused momentarily, but then, quickly and inevitably, exchange anxious glances with one another, as each dreams up some plausible bit of fiction they might offer me, in order to enable their escape. But was not some idea, or some set of ideas, intrinsic, learned, or otherwise, the very cause of my grief? I could rack my brain over this, and engage in a sort of chicken and egg, navel-gazing parlour game, which would necessarily end only in my bewilderment. Yet might it not offer precisely that distraction which I so needed at this awful moment in this grim forest? It is lovely, indeed it is, nevertheless, when I poke beneath its surface of adorable sleeping owls and multicoloured burnished leaves. I find only horror, holocausts everywhere, underneath each log, in every pond, in the clouds and sky, in the microbial worlds and universes, which I cannot help crushing, try as I might. It is only my griefs which drive me forwards, and they are plentiful enough, inexhaustible, apparently. When one ends, another is gleefully rubbing its hands together, just off stage, in ardent anticipation of its entrance. And so I stagger forwards through this banal, idiotic life, the stupefying banalities and griefs of which force me to clutch at any distraction which is offered me. Whether it dresses itself like a commoner or wears a tuxedo, it is all the same. They reek, one and all, of desperation. The desperation of slaves prodded forwards by insane, sadistic masters, I and they. All of us attempting to distract ourselves and each other with bits of gossip, too often told jokes, and obvious, self-serving lies. This endless parade of buffoons, with its imbecilic soundtrack of half-hearted, hypocritical chuckles, frequent winces, and the not-so-occasional shrieks of agony, which custom dictates are to be ignored. I see the slave to whom I speak beside me, with whom I gossip and exchange witticisms. How awful he appears in his awful nakedness and proximity. He who was at least bearable in my imagination, where I could do with him and engage with him as, and make of him what I wished. Now I am confronted with his sheer awfulness. All the discolorations and small disfigurations which my imagination had taken such care to erase, the appalling manner in which he snorts, touches his face, and inadvertently reveals his baseness and hypocrisy with 1,000 unconscious expressions, phrases, and tones of voice. I close my eyes, nod my head, and am suddenly transported to some interior compartment of myself, not quite as vulnerable to the landfills of visual and auditory disgust by which I had been assaulted a moment ago. I have escaped, I am floating, the moment has not passed, for moments do not exist here. It is familiar, yes, but familiar implies there is an I there, experiencing, comparing, and remarking to myself. But there is none of that. The idea of familiarity only comes us once we have been kicked out of an Eden precisely because of, and by that thought, or of any other for that matter. And so here I am, again, lurching forwards, prodded by hot pokers up my ass, wielded by demons who never fully reveal themselves, except now and again in my dreams, or in the presence of this or that gangrenous, pimply-faced simpleton, cackling and squawking about his failed marriage, the unpleasant circumstances of his workplace, or perhaps the chancre on his cock with which some promiscuous mistress has blessed him. Surely I could daydream more pleasantly than this. I cannot in any meaningful sense control or direct them. They go their own way, but, at the very least, I can interrupt them when they become particularly horrid by some violent jerking of the body, or some masochistic clawing at myself. There are 1,000 ways to do it, believe me, I know. I've had far more practice than most. I've a mind which coughs up the most atrocious scenarios with the most astonishing rapidity and consistency. It's a goddamn centennial celebration when I'm able to puke up a pleasant one, which, having not a clue how it could possibly have arisen in a mind such as mine, darts its gaze around nervously, hastens away, and scouts about for the nest of some happy idiot in which it can come to rest. As for me, it's more or less fiends and fiends only. I am quite the gender-specific restroom, if you will. That is to say, admission is granted only to the most merciless and psychopathic of phantoms, O's. They invariably sniff me out, from however distant the galaxy in which they're presently making mischief. I'm a very desirable refuge for such as they. And me? I'm like a cow who doesn't know he's to be momentarily hung from a meat hook and flayed alive. A Jew who doesn't have the faintest notion he's to be herded onto a train and gassed later that day. You would think I would have grown accustomed to it, to expect the next atrocity, to be on the lookout constantly, but no. The moment the hatpan du jour of a moment ago has been pulled from my flesh, I feel all right, comforted, safe. Hey now, I'm not being battered by that vicious tornado anymore. And so, needless to say, this present tense I of the hurricane vibe shall remain the ongoing tenor of my life. No more Tristan Act 3 tenors for me. No way, no how. Righty, right, clear sailing from here on out, no question. And suddenly, don't you know that SS guard, slaughterhouse worker, or whoever it happens to be this time, jumps in front of me with his Luger or pitchfork, my short-lived little asylum, that mirage in which I had foolishly indulged myself a moment ago, will, if I am lucky, become a memory with which I can alternately soothe and torture myself when in the midst of some future horror. And when that memory ages, it will, needless to say, grow rancid. As all memories do, it will rot like a corpse baked too long in the sun, stinking of putrid meat, vegetables, shit, and sour milk, all with the vague and sickly sweet stench which corpses have, the sweetness of which was, for me, at first, confusing, narcotizing, fascinating, and deeply compelling, like a melody I once adored during pubescence, but which now sounds utterly and hopelessly insipid. A treacly word of condolence offered to a Lear bent upon the corpse of his Cordelia. Needless to say, any memory which bubbles up from within me is, more often than not, daubed only in colours which flatter me, which put me in the most optimistic of lights, regardless at whose expense this retouching takes place. Nothing vanishes entirely. I might come to inhabit that forest floor once again, but if and when I do, the experience will be skewed in one fashion or another. It will, perhaps, highlight only those few rapturous moments of stillness, or, more likely, accentuate the nearness of the evil spirits who were about to pounce and tear to shreds both it and me. Either way, it would not be as it was. No matter. We tell ourselves very different stories about such moments, that we are indeed now the he who experienced the moment which then flooded our former consciousness, he and no other. That the self we were a moment ago has in fact vanished, travelled effortlessly and completely through time and space to collide with and become some former self, who is now in the presence of a bygone beloved, or perhaps arch-enemy, in some blissful paradise or fiery inferno, with everything just as it was, and we who we were then, which is all, needless to say, the purest fantasy. How we come to believe it so glibly, so adroitly, and without the slightest effort is a great mystery. It is, perhaps, to be explained through the activity of some sort of mechanism which our unconscious believes might best serve our interests. Although our intellect tells us with the greatest certainty that such a thing cannot possibly be the case. We are merely our present self, as it were, dreaming. But surely something of these things have survived and are strung along some spider's web, some lattice work within us, consisting of an infinity of memories in constant interaction, one subsuming the other, possibly even in a Darwinian battle for supremacy, although, clearly, it is most frequently the unpleasant memories which survive. The sweetest and most honeyed of our memories are like confections of mouth-watering chocolate, which can put us in a momentary ecstasy, it is true. But when grabbed at or pursued past a certain point, become nauseating, viscous sludge, unrecognizable, and all the more torturous on account of their metamorphosis from the delightful thing they were but a moment before. My wife comes to me frequently, and not only in dream, on walks, in parks, while working, walking, daydreaming. But it is, of course, not her, and I am not the he who knew and loved her. It is merely my present tense self, which shall vanish too in a heartbeat to become another soothing itself, grasping at straws to keep the ever-changing grief both alive and away. Yes, both at once. That is the curious goal. The way in which I delude myself that I am privy to her resurrection, both her resurrection and that of my grief, which has taken such a long and curious path through the years, nay, decades, of impassivity and numbness, all the while tattered with unpredictable hours, days, and weeks of unimaginable agony, which would come and rip through me like violent shock waves through glass, shattering the manicured stillness I had been cultivating, and which I had assumed was to remain the condition of my existence. And then, finally, after a decade or so of those ominous tremors, the earthquake, too, composed not simply of grief, or, if it was grief, it wore 1,000 different masks. The feeling, nay, the certainty of having no self, of being only some molten, naked core, subject to fits of rage, disgust, and momentary ecstasies, followed by what felt like gargantuan tsunami, after tsunami crashing upon monumental reef after reef, all now to be somehow understood as my experience. And yet there was no me left to claim to be having it. Were it all to have been portrayed in some surrealist film, it would have been, without question, a very bad surrealist film, with none of the underlying dream-propelled momentum and intuitive rightness that the better ones have. There was only disaster, havoc, shipwrecks, daily Hiroshimas, miraculously endured, and unhappily survived. How do they differ? Death from what should be far simpler, falling out of love. For the woman the difference is more obscure, or perhaps more obvious. But for us, for me, when I have seen old lovers of mine, a few with whom I had spent a great many years, withered and worn away, like once noble cliffs barraged by tides and lambasted by time, as it was, needless to say, the case with me, it seemed as if the woman I had once been in love with had, in fact, died, and that the creature standing before me was her walking corpse, as, indeed, I must have appeared to her. How different would my thoughts both of her and of all this then become, full of the cruelest disappointment, not at or with her, certainly, but rather at the merciless cruelty of the seasons, at time, which had taken these two vibrant, flourishing, entangled flowers, ripped them so cruelly apart, and, that not being sufficient, stomped pitilessly upon their features to the point of their becoming almost unrecognizable. I would then attempt to open the pages of our love in my mind's eye and memory, those of our home, our dogs, the gorgeous, blossoming magnolia tree, the laughter, all those feelings of bliss which felt as if they could never possibly come to an end. They were indeed all still there, yet somehow shrunken. You could no longer entice them to fill the wide-screen cinema of my inner eye. They remained stubbornly emaciated, a postcard only, which might evoke a sigh or even a tear, but never anything remotely approaching sobbing, much less deepest misery. But with my first wife, she who would remain forever 31, as I became Dorian Gray in Portrait, Mirror, and Reality. With her, it was a very different story. She was and is more vivid than she ever was in life, and that is to say, a great deal. Whether she is laughing, sleeping, chatting, whether we are walking, kissing, embracing, making love, it is the same, always the same. My mind begins to feel as if it has been stuffed with cabbage. My eyes droop, my gaze wanders down and to the right. Tears rise to sobs. It is all completely and absolutely wonderful, my deepest, most secret treasure, while simultaneously the most violent pain I have ever experienced. Dear God, that moment in the bedroom of finding her when the world turned upside down, along with her. It was only a few hours later that the word posthumous began to possess me, repeating itself involuntarily and incessantly in my inner ear. A command from some netherworld which never tired of informing me that I was henceforth to roam the world only as a melancholy phantom. I, who had not exactly been brimming with dynamism prior to that awful, fateful day. And so it was henceforth to be. My trudging through life, I might, momentarily, step out of some mournful twilight into some tiny area, momentarily illumined by a vagrant fleck of light, yet would invariably find myself, with far greater frequency, in a pitch-black, cavernous hell of soul-crushing wretchedness, in which there was only suffering, the desperation to sleep, and the thought of death as a friend. These came to be the foundational threads of my existence, my deplorable, dreadful life, a life that should have never been started and which cannot possibly go on much longer. And yet I still awake each morning, inevitably the saddest and most grief-stricken period of the day, to some more or less unfamiliar version of myself, all of them contemptible, not least so because they give me no indication or warning which of them is to appear, of which of them I shall be forced to be. More than often than not, it is an utterly unrecognizable self to which I waken, which, though equally disgusting and abhorrent, offers, as some small compensation, the interest of meeting some new person I hadn't previously known lay within me. I call a compensation that which is undoubtedly a curse, that I might provide myself with some new idiotic reason to slog through another day, that reason most often being curiosity, which kills cats, so they say, yet, sadly, has not yet killed me. Are not all these women merely puppets, and I the puppeteer, and I too more than likely a puppet, made to drag my sorry ass through another lamentable day? But by whom? Are they only in me? And am I, perhaps similarly, somehow in them? We are all, almost certainly, first and foremost, the puppets of some sadistic, Gnostic demiurge, or, these days it's all the rage to say or think, of some sadistic kid in a parallel universe running a simulation in his mother's basement, when he's not busy torturing animals in an adjacent park, or eyeing his little sister with a similar intent. And to be this ill, in this much pain, and to be denied even a hint of genius to plod through life a hair's breadth more thoughtful than the average slob, just barely enough to be constantly assaulted by the perpetual reality of what I am not and could never be. Thanks, boss. Perhaps it is him whom now I see. Are you there, Yaldabaoth? You who have been so long awaited, after all these countless eons, standing now by the foot of my bed? You who should have come, long ago, who was, perhaps, busy elsewhere, or thought 50 years more of appalling suffering a good thing, or, more likely, thought nothing at all about any of that. No matter, it is you. You are here now. You have come, no doubt, as a friend, this night, to release me, after an eternity of painful waiting and longing, after a too long life, as dismissible and absurd as a bad pun, unworthy of even a cringe. You have come. Be a good boy now and shuffle off. This will take but a moment.